Hello, and welcome to Conversations with Sara. I had briefly mentioned in a video on our page that I wanted to talk about a couple of management topics, which are budget and quality. Two very important things I just want to maybe shed a little bit of light on and help you understand a little bit better. Let's start with quality. Quality is what everyone says they want, what everyone feels they deliver, and it's true. Most people do not get into healthcare to hurt others. They get into healthcare to help and to do no harm. And the quality department is there to ensure that we remain on task with that and that we know where we're at with infections, with falls, with the things that we are held accountable to. Sometimes in organizations, that relationship feels very adversarial. And it's a shame because nursing management and quality should work together as a partnership. There should be some open dialogue. And when I speak of quality, I also include the infection preventionist because it's all rolls up together. And infection prevention and quality go hand in hand and you're usually under the same umbrella. I will give you a little bit of background. I spent a year as a director of quality at an inpatient rehab facility. We opened this standalone hospital. I learned so much. But one of the things I think that we get caught up in the day-to-day, and especially those who are newer in the roles, you don't realize the history of the quality department. There's always been a quality department. There's always been people who look at the things that happened in the hospital. But back in the old days, if something happened to a patient, if they got a fall and hurt themselves, broke a leg, if they developed an infection, the hospital just charged the insurance company for it. It was just part of the stay. Well, that all changed. And CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, decided that they didn't want to pay for things that happened in the hospital that were caused by the hospital. And the insurance companies followed suit. You can't blame them. I wouldn't want to pay for something that I didn't go into the hospital to do or to get taken care of, something the hospital caused. So part of an initiative that I happened to learn about when it rolled out, which was back in 2004, 2005, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement launched a huge campaign called Save 100,000 Lives because they found that there were like 98,000 people dying in the hospital due to something that happened in the hospital. And this was a significant number of people. I can't remember exactly the example they used, but it was something like, if there was a major airplane crash once a month or once a week in this country for a year. This is significant. So the IHI launched this campaign, and a lot of the things that they rolled out, that they initiated, that we still use to this day, were the rapid response teams, bundling of care, use of checklist, barcode scanning for medications. All these things spun from this great campaign and initiative around quality because we do want to give quality care. Hospitals started paying attention, the administrative business side started paying attention to quality when their reimbursement got tied to it. Sad to say, but that's business. So it behooves them, it makes business sense for us to provide the best, highest quality care that we can. So just as a new manager, as a frontline leader, know your quality indicators. You hear them at the bedside. Now you're going to hear them a little bit different. You're going to see them and how they affect the whole hospital. You're going to look at them a little bit different way. I implore you to take a few moments and kind of read some of the history behind this. Pull up on the internet there, and we can add a link here to this video. There is a lot of information out there on IHI's Save 100,000 Lives campaign, which they were tremendously successful. It's been really good for us and a shot in the arm. So please reach out, try to make a good connection with your quality person. Welcome the quality team, the infection preventionists to your unit. Don't see them as adversaries. They're not trying to get you in trouble. They really want the nurses to do the best job that they can and for the regulations to be adhered to and the standards that we set to be met. That's it in a nutshell. So that's kind of all I really want to say about quality. If you have something more, if you have any questions or you want to dive a little deeper into quality indicators and how they're determined, we could do that. But today I just wanted to have a little conversation to let you know that they are important, they are a friend, and they're someone that you should definitely reach out to. The next subject I'm going to talk about is budget. Now, budget is a little more complicated. Budgets are the one thing that gives new managers and directors some anxiety. You can feel the tension rise in a room when someone says, "Oh, we're going to start working on budgets." That's because it's an area of vulnerability. It's an area that, unless you're like me and got an MBA, you haven't taken any finance classes. There were no finance classes in nursing school. So how do they expect you to understand? And they don't expect you to be an expert at creating a budget. There is a chief financial officer. There is a financial team. Those are the experts. Those are the people that are ultimately going to make the budget. And by that, I mean create the budget. So they will invite the frontline managers to give opinions, to look over what's being worked on. They may send you a spreadsheet. They may send you a worksheet. They may invite the group of all the managers in a care center together to hash out what the budget looks like. It may be done at a table with just a few people and your director. However that budget process works, it's a group effort, and it's not something that you have to create on your own. Basically, budgets for the next year are based on past performance and the state of your unit prior. So unless you know some big changes are coming, that they can change the budget to meet those big changes, it's just going to be a little bit of tweaking of numbers here and there. So don't worry about budget process. As a manager, what you need to focus on month to month, pay period to pay period, is how you manage the unit to the budget that's been determined. How do you, as the manager of a unit or a cost center, how do you stay within your budget? And if you don't stay in your budget, you need to be able to speak to that. And that is called variances. When you don't match, and it's usually over, if you spend over in personnel or you spend over in supplies, that is considered a variance, and there will usually be a variance report that you will have to answer to and explain what's going on. Supplies are easy because it's right there. A good example for being over budget in supplies happened with COVID, the onset of N95 usage, face surgical mask usage, the shields, all of these things that we had a handful of items on the unit. Now we needed 10 times more than what we had ever used before. So we used so many more supplies during COVID than what we normally did, that in most places, the finance team developed a COVID account, developed a bucket that you could charge these extra supplies to that would go under the, oh, we know what this is about because this was for COVID. Sometimes it could be if you've had a change in patient population and now you're using a different type of dressing or more wound dressings than you ever used before because your floor started taking patients who have wounds. Things like that changes, or if you go to a new set of IV tubing. I've had that happen where the company decided that they wanted to use a better product. It cost a little bit more money. That hit everyone's budget. You sit there at the meeting or you type up in your report, these are trends, these are things, if you can explain it and say, yes, this is why we're spending so much. Now, sometimes it could be that the nurses are hoarding supplies, grabbing more than they need to do something, leaving it in the room, and those supplies get thrown away. That happens. And again, that is something as a manager that you need to be aware of so that you can manage this. You can bring it up in staff meetings. A very good thing that I've done that's kind of a wonderful visual is to gather up all these extra supplies, put them in a clear plastic bag, and then hold this bag up and say, look, here's what came out of a patient's room, and have them guess how much money they just threw away. Now, that takes a little work and effort to try to figure out how much all of that costs. You can do that, or you could just say, look at what we're throwing away. This is money that affects their raises in the long run and affects your ability to bring on board new things or to buy new equipment. So letting the staff know the direct impact. If you gather up 5 bandages when you only needed 1, that over time accumulates, and now we can't buy new vital sign machines because we don't have the money anymore. We're spending it all in bandages. Those are things that a manager is expected to do. That's supplies. Now let's talk about people. People and the effective use of your staff, following your staffing grid or your staffing matrix, which is a document that says this many patients, you would have X number of nurses, X number of aides, a unit clerk, X number of teletechs, whoever you have on your unit to support the patients, you will be on this grid. Making sure that you adhere to that grid, making sure your charge nurses or your staffing personnel, whoever it is who determines assignments and makes the staff decisions for the day, follow that grid based on the patients that you have. This is called your productivity. If you are following your grid, you're going to be very close to 100%. If you have the adequate staff and your census is full. Sweet spot for productivity is 95 to 105%. And that's a sweet spot because you always have a little bit of variance here or there. Less than 95% means, for some reason, somehow, there are more people than you need based on the census. Greater than 105% means you're running very lean. So you may think that that's a good thing, but when you run high productivity numbers, staff morale drops, burnout happens, mistakes happen, people are tired, they're stressed, and you're usually paying a lot of overtime to try to cover what it is that's causing that deficit. So being over 105% is not a good thing. Again, just being aware as a manager, looking at what's going on, looking at your trends in payroll, looking at what decisions are being made. There's a few factors, like I said, that can affect this. It could be that you have someone, say it's Saturday, and the charge nurse sees that, okay, we're dropping census, so I probably should send Sally home, but guys have been working so tight. Let's just keep Sally. It'll make everybody happy. We'll keep Sally. Well, that might be okay once in a while for an hour or two, but when that becomes a habit, when they just keep a pair of hands when they really don't call for it, that adds up. If you float someone to another department, but they don't change the cost center, they still are charged to you. If you have nurses or aides on orientation, and for some reason they don't clock in under the orientation code, or it isn't entered in the book, so the payroll person doesn't code their time as orientation, that shows up as that they are productive members of your team, and so it affects your productivity. Being aware of this, staying on top of these trends, these are the things that you can explain away. Sometimes you have legitimate reasons. If you go over your orientation budget, it's because a lot of people left. This happened in COVID. There was a mass exodus of nurses, so you had more people on orientation than you budgeted for or planned for. Again, you explain these things away. But being mindful of following the grid, making sure that your payroll is tight, that the people who are charged to your unit were truly working on your unit. These are all things that you as a manager are expected to know and to take care of. Other things that affect your budget that kind of affect is on the revenue side, and some things you may as a manager have full control over, and some things you don't. What you can work towards and improve is your length of stay. That's how long your patients stay on your unit, and making sure that the length of stay matches what really happens, matches what should happen. And I think this is a good time to kind of explain how we derive length of stay. We go back to our lovely CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They pay the hospital based on what is called a DRG, which is a diagnosis-related group. That is a very complex system, of course, it's the government, of payment. It's how hospitals charge for the services rendered. There are people who are experts at this. There are people who code, who case management knows DRGs very, very well. There's a lot of classes out there that explain it and explain how certain diseases, certain surgeries, things that happen fall into a DRG. Some DRGs are considered heavy, which means you get paid a lot for that DRG. Others are considered light. So the DRG, the diagnosis related group, comes attached to that is a expected length of stay. So I will use an example of congestive heart failure. If you come in with congestive heart failure, you have an expected length of stay of 3 days. I'm just throwing this out because it may have changed, but it used to be 3 days. If you have congestive heart failure with an ejection fraction less than 35%, which means you're sicker, which means you're probably on a transplant list, that estimated length of stay now broadens out to 5 days. And you get paid a little bit more. So if you have a patient whose DRG gives you 3 days at $100, I'm just making these numbers up, and you get them out in 3 days, you get the full $100. It's expected revenue. If the patient stays 6 days instead of 3, you still only get $100, but now it's stretched over 6 days. If the patient stays 12 days, you still only get $100. Now it's stretched across 12 days. That is why length of stay is very important. That's why it gets mentioned a lot. People look at length of stay. There's a lot of initiatives around how we can improve length of stay and get our patients out the door sooner. It affects you because it affects the revenue that's coming in. Part of what happens with DRGs is you have what's called a case mix index, which is a CMI. That is also another number that the finance team can provide to you. Case mix index is an average of all the weighted patients that you have. If you have a high case mix index, that means that you've got heavy DRGs, you've got complex patients who need longer length of stay. If you have a low case mix index, that means that your patients are at the lighter DRGs and should have a shorter length of stay. So when you look at that number, if your case mix index is low, but your length of stay is longer than expected, there is a disconnect. So it's not the patients are staying because they medically need to stay. The patients are staying because more than likely they have a psychosocial thing going on. we're waiting authorization to get to a nursing home. Family isn't sure what they want to do with them. They keep changing their mind. They want home health. No, they don't. There can be lots of stumbling blocks to get a patient out the door and to a safe discharge. So that can be seen with your case mix index. But if your patients are truly sick, complicated, there's a lot of medical things going on, that your case mix index will be high, your acuity is high, and your length of stay will be longer, but it all balances out. That's all this is a balancing game. And just being aware of your part in it and the things that you can do and why an organization rolls out an initiative to look at throughput and how fast we're getting the beds turned around, how quickly we can get patients out the door. Are we discharging and then waiting 6 or 8 hours to finally get the patient out of here? Does that help with satisfaction? No. Does it help with our numbers? No. And it ultimately affects our reimbursement. Other things that can affect productivity is the number of patients that you have that are classified as observation. An observation patient is someone who does not meet inpatient criteria. They're sick, don't get me wrong. These patients are sick, but there's not enough acutely going on with them. We're not treating them with enough things for them to qualify as an inpatient. Inpatient carries the most weight in a hospital. So they're considered observation. That is an hourly charge. And another category is outpatient. And you would think, well, there shouldn't be any outpatients in the inpatient setting. There shouldn't be any outpatients in the hospital, but there are. Sometimes, depending on where you work, that could be a big thing. There could be a unit that has far more outpatients than anyone anticipated. These are blood transfusions. These are people that come in and out the same day. So you need staff to take care of them, but they're not there at midnight. And that's key. Midnight census. That's how everybody runs off of midnight census. So you may have 20 patients at 9 o'clock in the morning, but if 10 of them are outpatients and they're gone by 4 in the afternoon, you only have 10 at midnight. And that makes it look like you had double the staff than what you really needed. It sounds unfair, it feels unfair, and it's something that you have to explain over and over and over again until they can get things straightened out and either develop a unit that these observation outpatients go to a specific unit, or they build that into the budget. So I've seen these things happen all over the place. I've seen it be a struggle. For most inpatient units, the best way to stay within your budget is to make sure your beds are full. Take the patients, get the emergency room admissions up on the floor and in the unit before midnight, get the patients who need to be discharged on their way, and just try to keep this all the balls balancing in the air. But remember, at the end of the day, budget doesn't fall 100% on your shoulders. There's a lot of interdisciplinary action around these initiatives. There's a lot of other people who have to answer. Physicians have to answer for why they make the decisions that they make. Case management has to answer for why they're not helping in the process to move the patients along. There's a lot to it. And you have to be careful. You don't want to send somebody out of the hospital before they're ready, because then they become a readmission. Readmissions hurt us as well. Our health system is a very complex health system. It doesn't have to be so complex, but it's the culture we're living in right now. It's the system we have right now. And until that system changes, until we move to some sort of a universal plan, until we move to something that is more manageable, this is our reality. And the balancing act continues. And we always have to keep our due diligence, know that we are doing the best that we can, looking at things, realizing that holding people accountable to not hold on to staff, flexing down. It's the hardest thing for people to do. It's the hardest thing for a charge nurse to say, no, I need to send you home because we've dropped in census. They don't like doing it because they want everyone to be happy and have that extra pair of hands. I have found doing this, working with newer managers, a lot of the things that I take for granted, a lot of the acronyms that I think everyone knows, they don't know. And we all have to remember that if we are going to mentor someone or work with someone to help train them, that you do have to start with basics. So I'll leave with one final basic budget consideration, and that is FTE. You hear FTE all the time. That is what we look at when we say turnover and vacancy rate is all based on your FTEs, and FTE means full-time equivalent. So a 1.0 is 40 hours. That is, an employee that works 40 hours a week is considered a 1. So as you drop down, most nurses and a lot of CNAs, depending on where you work, do 12-hour shifts. They work 3 12s a week, which is considered full-time. That's 36 hours. That doesn't make them a 1, it makes them a 0.9. So they are a 0.9 FTE. Part-time goes down from there. You can be a 0.8, 0.6, 0.4, on down, based on the number of hours per week that you are expected or that you are hired to work. So when you become a new manager and you start hearing about FTEs and you start looking at these numbers that kind of look a little crazy, and you say, well, what is 29.7? What does that mean to me? Know in your mind that means you have probably 32 or 33 people, but they're considered FTEs. They're looking at the number of hours they work and not the bodies. So that's all I have to say today. If you have anything else that you would like to talk about, if there's something more about budget or more about quality that you would like to hear about, please reach out to me. You can leave a comment below, or you can say something on the Facebook group, or you can send me a message and let me know what you want to hear. I came up with this because this is something we've been talking about where I currently work, and I thought it would be a good video to send out to all of you. Again, I am not trying to be a classroom. I am not trying to teach you the full of anything. I'm just offering you some suggestions and having a conversation. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day. Bye.